Welcome to Auburn, Our Story, a series presented by the White River Valley Museum exploring unique perspectives on our area's extraordinary history. In this episode, Denny Swanson shares with us his unique passion. Almost every early settler to the Auburn area was, by necessity, a logger. The dense forests that historically covered the valley had to be cleared in order for the land to be farmed. Originally, logging was done by hand, with the help of oxen and horses, which was very time-consuming and labor-intensive. With the introduction of steam power, many people became professional loggers, relying on steam-powered engines known as donkeys and small logging railroads to remove the wood from the forest and transport it to the mills. In 1879, when the Olsen family purchased their property along the Green River, they acquired with the land a small mill and logging outfit. When the museum began restoration efforts at the farm in 2002, local resident Denny Swanson stepped forward to help. Swanson owns and operates an antique sawmill, similar to the one originally on the Olsen property. He set to work, sketching out the details for the lumber, harvesting cedar trees, and milling the logs to their original specifications. Swanson's mill provides a valuable glimpse into the valley's past and is playing an important role in the Olsen Farm's future.
It's a bell saw, and the patent numbers on it are 1910. I heard about it from a friend. I drove over to take a look at it. It was on the east shore of Lake Meridian. It had to have been about 25 years ago. It was completely overgrown with berries. Everything had kind of fallen in. The shed was identical to the one you see there, but it had all caved in on top of it. I pulled off enough berry bushes to realize what I was looking at, and I've always loved machinery since a little boy. So I knew I had to have it at first sight. So it was a very reasonable offer. In fact, the gentleman was very pleased that somebody really wanted it. He poured oil over all the parts, so it spun apart beautifully. I made a map of each part as I disassembled it, and so I could follow that to reassemble it. It was still some challenges, but no, it's got done, and I've tried to leave everything just exactly as I found it, and rebuild the shed and everything identical to what I'd seen over there. It had a huge planer next to it. I'd have loved to have hauled home the planer, but that would have taken a railroad car, and it weighed 3 times what the mill does. There was no possibility of doing that, but it had been a working mill. They would drag it through the woods. It was on a sled, like they did so much with the steam donkeys then, with the huge long cables stretched for miles. So that was a common mode of transportation for them at that time. They'd drag it through the woods, use it to build or assemble a bigger mill, and then push that aside and usually use it to cut the secondary lumber, and mostly railroad ties and stuff like that's what it was usually used for. So that's kind of its working history. It was originally steam-driven. I can't tell you too much about the original steam-driven part of it, but now it's run by it's an old Chrysler engine. It's pretty old itself. I've heard it was a 29, but I think it's a 39. It's a bilge pump out of a World War II Liberty ship. So it's nice engine. It's all self-contained, and up until just a few years ago, I could get parts for it. And now it's almost impossible. My wife got thoroughly frustrated with me down here most of the time. There's been times when she's developed some jealousy of it. I thought, well, I'll just get rid of it. So a lot of people came out and looked at it and wanted it, but 2 people actually showed up with money and made a down payment, and I left on a trip. They said they were coming back later. I left on a trip, and I got home from the trip, and I asked Joanne, my wife, if they came and got the mill, and she evaded the question for half a day, and finally I just pinned her down, and she said, well, they did show up, but I told them you'd changed your mind, and gave them their money back. So I backed off a little bit on it, and I appreciate her allowing me to keep it. I went down and saw the Mary Olson Farm and decided that, yes, I'd very much like to provide lumber for that thing. It would be it'd be an honor. A lot of farms did have a mill similar to this. So I think Montgomery Ward's in the 30s sold a version of this as a farm mill. I went and looked at it, and I realized that looking at the lumber that was on the farm, especially the barn, the kerf marks, the saw marks, the teeth marks, matched the radius of my saw, and that I would be able to replicate those exactly, the boards that were on there. They were mostly 1x12s and up to 18 feet long, which is a challenge on this mill. A lot of the trees were here, and then a lot of them were brought in. I went to other sources for at least half of that lumber. I thought I'm kind of limited on how much lumber I've got and the logs that I had available, so I wanted to make each cut have a purpose, and so I did measure the barn. I measured each board that was needed, and did draw up more or less of a plan with each side of the barn and what and how much that side needed, and then I went from there and provided that lumber. So most of it was originally cedar, and that's back in the old days when they had clear, beautiful cedar to use for anything. So the original had probably no knots and was very clear, seldom a knot on it, and I could not duplicate that, but try as I may, but come as close as I can, but it's almost impossible this day and age. I loved running it, and the smell of the fresh sawdust, and especially the cedar, was something you could come down and just get lost in. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Mike, or my son, was here to help me, or sometimes the neighbors would drop over. I've got a couple of neighbors, if they hear this running, they kind of show up, so they enjoy it also. You know, this blade's supposed to set up straight. As long as it can run cool, it'll set up straight when it gets up to speed. And it's hammered to run at a certain speed. So I started calling around to find somebody that could hammer it. And I ended up in Seattle. The guy in Seattle referred me to Minnesota to North Carolina, to Tennessee. The guy in Tennessee took me back to Sumner, right here. So that's where I hauled, took the blade to Sumner, and that's where it got hammered. And he did a beautiful job. It was, you put it back on the mandrel and everything back on it, and it didn't vary a 64th of an inch all the way around in a circle. It was just beautiful. It's really very much of a lost art. The tooth is only about 1.5 inches long. Then the retainer is about 3 inches, and it's a half moon shape. And it's a rather unique design. It locks itself in. So taking all that pounding against the knots and everything else, the fact that it stays in there at all is something kind of amazing. There was some pretty good old engineering back in the old days, I'll tell you. And sometimes these logs have tension in them themselves. This one had a little bit at the start because it was pinching the blade closed, and that's what started that blade heating. It's supposed to, especially the butt end of the logs, have all that tension in it. Like you look at that great big stump there, and you can see they left all of that wood, and the reason they left it was because if you brought that butt end of that stump into a sawyer in the old days, he'd have thrown you out of the mill. Because they have so much tension in them. They just clamp down on the saw. I've tried to cut some of those butts, and I've had to use the chainsaw to saw my saw back out of it to release the tension from there, because they really clamp down, and you're clamped in before you know it. So that's why when you run around the woods and you see these great big huge stumps, and you wonder why they wasted all of that wood. Well, that's why, because even the smaller ones now will do just a smaller scale, but they're doing the same thing. The circular blades, no matter what type they are going out, because their efficiency was so low. This is only a 60% efficient, so you can see all the waste that goes out here, and the sawdust. That kerf is 3/8 of an inch, so you're throwing away an awful lot of material is being wasted. And the new little blades with the band saws that you see running along, they only 1/10 of an inch is their kerf, so they're much more efficient and a lot less hassle, I think, but not near as much fun. This has been enjoyable, something I've enjoyed for a long time. I wouldn't part with it.
For more historical views of Auburn, come see us at the White River Valley Museum at 918 H Street in the Lescove Community Campus, or you can visit us online at www.wrvmuseum.org. The museum is open Wednesday through Sunday from 12 to 4 p.m. Call us at 253-288-7433 for more information. Thanks for watching. Please join us again for another unique perspective on Auburn, Our Story. With every passing moment, history is made. What will yours be?